Sorry. There you go. Welcome, and at this time, we would like to convene the CAO Committee of the City of Palo Alto for June 4th, 2015. Will the clerk please call roll?
Councilmember Berman.
Here.
Chair Burt.
Here.
Councilmember Niss. Vice Mayor Schmidt.
Here.
3 present.
Thank you. So, Kathy, would you like to kick things off?
Thank you. Kathy Shan, Chief People Officer. I'm the HR Director for the city. And we want to talk today about the CAO evaluation process. So the chair of the committee had asked me to do a request for bids as Sherry Lund's contract had come to an end, and she indicated she was not interested in further pursuing doing the evaluations for Palo Alto. She's still in business. So we did a request for proposals. We did that in back on March 6th. We actually only got one complete proposal. We had a couple of firms who indicated some initial interest and then did not have anyone on their staff that was that they could identify who could really complete the work. It's very specialized work. I was very happy that Municipal Resources did respond, and I had a couple of phone conversations with Mary Egan, who's the principal, to talk a little bit about the evaluation process, the history, and encourage her to submit a bid, which she did. I might note that initially the request for proposal was for $25,000, and in one of our conversations she said the process is rich enough that I don't think we can do it for that. And I said, please submit a bid for what you think is reasonable. I will also say that in the effort to get the work underway in May, we've already passed that, and just it's been difficult to schedule with all the other council meetings. MRG originally was proposing a timeline that started in May and that was a little bit more timely. Here we are in June. So I'm going to turn it over to Mary Egan and Deb Fagoni, thank you, to talk about their approach and what they've got to offer, and then have you ask any questions that you want to about their approach.
Great, thank you.
Great. I'm Mary Egan, Municipal Resource Group. Our company can replicate the services of a municipal agency, and my practice group handles human resources, labor relations, organizational change initiatives. There's about a dozen of us that work under my leadership, and I am a partner in the company. And we help cities, counties, and special districts and public agencies with complicated human resources, labor relations, and governance challenges. And a big part of our practice are these evaluations for appointed officials. Right now, we've just finished San Luis Obispo. We're in Los Altos. We do the city of Roseville. We do Fresno Unified School District. We've designed Sunnyvale's process, and we'll begin that soon. A number of other agencies, including Walnut Creek. We went into Walnut Creek when they had some very public issues with the city manager and city attorney, and designed their process and worked through that with them. All these agencies have us come back year after year, and so it's become a really big part of our practice. Of course, Manhattan Beach and Southern California, but a lot of agencies in your neighborhood. And so we design and deliver these processes, and we have a template and a master plan, and we understand how it works working with elected officials and your schedules and what's important to you. But we also realize that you want to customize this process. So we have not, I've talked to a Sherry Lund because I didn't want to frankly, respond without knowing why she didn't want to come back. And we were a very busy firm, and so I wanted to make sure that I understood where she was coming from. And so I did go through her methodology. Ours is somewhat different, but of course, we're here today to talk with you about what works for Palo Alto. And so Deb and I have known each other for years and years, and we were department heads and worked together a number of capacities in the city of San Jose. And so when Deb retired, she and I talked a lot about how we could work together and her interest in doing this work. And so we're collaborating on this project, and it's wonderful because she lives in this area, and I'm come from Sacramento. So given the high touch interest of this council and the fact that you're so large and there's 4 evaluations to do, it's really fabulous that Deb can join us in this project. So we wanted to talk through with you our methodology, our design, but we also want to leave enough time for you to ask us questions about where you want to go. So we're going to really quickly whip through that, if it's okay with you, and then leave some time for you to give us your input.
Well, it is my pleasure to be here with you this evening. And Mr. Chair, just so I understand, you have a hard stop at 6?
Pretty hard.
Okay. So let me orient you to a packet that you have in front of you. I'll hit the highlights of what we think is important, and then turn it back to you to ask us questions. Although there are some things that we would like to make sure you touch on today. And so what you have is an agenda of how we had planned the hour. You've just heard from Mary. I'm going to briefly go through process and timeline, and then time for the committee, and then any wrap-up. You have an overview of the process that we envision, that we believe is responsive. So there's a packet of about 4 pieces. One is that agenda I just commented on. One is a process overview that I'll quickly walk you through. A timeline is the 3rd piece. And then the 4th is we will just, by reference, talk a little bit about if you were to give us the green light tonight, and I understand that council approval of the contract is needed. We just wanted to mention why past documents are important. And let me just say that right now, and then I won't dwell on it. As Mary mentioned, she got background from the former consultant. We are not interested in replicating their process. However, historical perspective is important, including what the evaluation was last year. So that's really the intent behind asking for documents. So with that in mind, if you could just keep side by side the review timeline, which is about 3 in, and then the process overview. And I want to draw your attention to the timeline. You can read it on your own, but there's a few things I think to know about it. One, the end in mind, based on what we knew Palo Alto's interests were, is to conclude this process by September 21st that week. One of our asks today, if you are comfortable with MRG, recognizing that council still needs to approve this contract, is for me to get some face time with the appointees over the next 2 weeks before the council approval. And that's really to share the same information with them, get their feedback and input, and so that we can really finalize this process from the standpoint of the committee and with the appointee fingerprints on it, so to speak. The council would approve the contract on the 22nd. We would then launch, and very early in this process, we want to work with the clerk to schedule your time. And I'll point out those chunks of time and want to make sure that the committee is comfortable with that. We know you're going on recess, which is a consideration in this timeline. Then just going down the timeline very briefly, there would be an online evaluation that would be launched before you go on recess for the department directors or who we designate from each of the offices of the appointees to provide input. We would also, though, have one for the council that is really your starting point for weighing in on the performance. We'd want to close that before you go on recess, so it's about 11 days, including the weekend. So you see July 3rd is the close of that. Then we'll get into the back-of-house stuff like compiling results. We would also initiate during that period the self-assessment of the appointees and give them about 6 weeks for that. If Palo Alto has a format that you've used in the past and you're comfortable with, or if this committee would like to weigh in on what you want to know from the appointees, certainly we'd want to hear that. If you want to leave it open-ended, whether you get a 30-page document or a 5-page document from them, that works too. And then really what's very important here, I think if you turn to your document over, is a next important milestone for the council members is to have me interview them one-on-one. So we want to get those on your calendar for the week of August 24th through the 28th. I'm assuming you've been through that before, so I won't explain what that means. And then shortly thereafter, I would begin preparing the appointees for their closed session conversation with all of you. As of right now in this schedule, and again, we want to hear from you, we have another meeting that we would schedule for September 10th right now, just for discussion purposes, where we'd meet with this committee. My assumption is in closed session to talk about where we're at in the process and to begin to frame up the closed session format, including what level of discussion you want to have on compensation, because Mary will be doing some of the compensation work. We, in this schedule, plan to have the closed sessions the week of September 14th to the 18th. Really, the question to you all is, are you willing to commit the time during that week in order to get those done? And we could talk about, how that could be structured in your feedback to us today. And at this point in time, the reviews will be finalized the week of the 21st. This is a proposal. If you would like more feedback loops, more engagement, face-to-face engagement, certainly we could plug that in. It may mean, though, that the contract that is going to the council on the 22nd might need to be renegotiated. Mary would need to comment on that in terms of the time frame that we've committed to. So that's just a question that's out there. Very briefly, if you look at the process overview now, and you could see side by side how this fits into the timeline. I guess the first thing that I'd like to say is all of this right now is designed to be a facilitative process that leads to a critical conversation between you and your appointees. So that's what is reflected here. The first question will be, do the performance elements that you've used in the past still work for you? I've got those listed here, so we do know that you've used those 8 or 9 or so elements. And one of the documents we would ask for, if you have them, is how have you defined those in the past? And we could certainly define them, but it would be interesting to know. And then, as I referenced, we'd enter the period of gathering perspectives through the online survey. So that's on the bottom of page 1 and then on to page 2, that we would launch instructions for, and would be questions designed at getting at those key elements on the first page if we're sticking with them. I've mentioned the appointee's self-assessment. It's an important piece of this process because I know from personal experience the appointee's view going into this process and in talking to their bosses is a pretty important one. And then in advance of your one-on-ones, we would give you a packet, and that is shown in the next section. Obviously, there'd be a cover memo. We would provide you with the compiled results of the online surveys from the directors or whoever is in this direct report pool. Although the council would be surveyed, we would not include that in the compilation. That's really to stimulate your thinking and to help me prepare for your interviews. Eventually, that feedback will be factored into the draft reviews, but at this stage, we do not envision it to be part of the compilation that goes into our one-on-ones. The prior year's evaluation, the self-assessment, and then a set of interview questions, which are below. I would sit down then with each of you. We would talk about each of the 4 appointees in the same setting. We'd allocate the amount of time that's necessary. The questions to stimulate your thinking, and they're not hard guidelines, are really all about your reflections about the performance, what is going well, what could be going better? Are there any pitfalls that the appointee should be mindful of, et cetera, et cetera. After your interviews, we would then start the drafting or continue the drafting that's been going on. I would then work with each appointee to prepare them for closed session. And we would meet with the CAO committee, as I mentioned, in that September timeframe, talk about what we've heard kind of in the totality, shape a process with you in terms of the closed session discussion that works for you. Decide if compensation is part of that setting or not once the appointee leaves the room. So we would be positioned to have that conversation with you and have you weigh in. The closed session then would be facilitated by Mary and I based on that game plan. And typically, as you all know, it consists of a presentation by the appointee, council Q&A and discussion. Appointee leaves the room, and then there's more conversation, or however you decide you want to do it. That then leads to finalizing the reviews, and depending on your interests, right now it does not anticipate feedback loops, but if the council would like feedback loops built in, then we certainly can consider that. And then in October, we envisioned a debrief. Right now, the proposal from MRG is for a multi-year contract with the city. And so it would be a great time to talk about what went well and what you might want retooled. And then we would end for the year. So that's it. We're really interested in hearing from you. Does what I've outlined meet your needs? What more would you want to know or see? And really importantly is how do you want to be engaged through this process and communicate with us? Thank you.
Colleagues, questions? Thank you very much.
Mm-hmm.
Thank you.
A couple of questions.
Yeah.
So you mentioned online surveys with directors and direct reports of the CAOs, and then us getting that feedback. Will you also be having live conversations with any of them, or is all of that an automated kind of online process?
We don't anticipate having live conversations, but we do ask one question at the bottom. You know, if someone wants to have a private conversation or be contacted, then that's, you know, that's built in.
Okay.
Yeah.
Sorry, didn't mean to-
And maybe I can just add, I know Mary responded to the RFP, but she and I spoke. The premise here is that the city wanted to simplify from the past. And one of the simplifications was on that issue.
Mhm.
Do you really need to have the one-on-one interviews? As I remember, that was one of the comments, so.
That makes sense. And then just in terms of the process, and this is, I mean, it's not necessary, I know we're pressed for time today. One of the things that I've tended to enjoy under the facilitated performance review in closed session was we'll often have a step before the appointee presentation where council will discuss ahead of time kind of what its goals and strategy is for the review, and that tends to be pretty helpful in terms of you know, us having the 9 of us having a chance to talk ahead of time and come up with a strategy of high level points that we want to make sure that we hit on in that meeting. So I noticed that that wasn't part of this, but obviously
It could be.
Yeah.
It could be.
Greg?
Do you have experience with a lot of cities that have the same issue we do, that you end up finalizing the review almost 3 months after the close of the fiscal year?
The timing really varies. Every agency has its own little schedule that they follow.
Right.
San Luis Obispo always does theirs in February. I have 4 agencies that do theirs right after the close of the fiscal year.
Yeah.
I've got some that do it in November, right before the calendar year. So it's sort of based on your own practices and what makes sense for you.
Yeah, I realize we have a special situation, but I remember last year it was fairly disruptive that, you know, 3 months, almost 3 months had gone by that we were not talking about.
We do have some clients that we do this a lot faster. for example, Walnut Creek is having me come in and do it all in about a week for their city attorney and their city manager. But they're a lot less complicated city. That's a smaller council, and they are trying to achieve different goals with
Yeah.
that process.
Greg, can I ask, is your concern that potential raises would not have been in the budget? Is that your concern or some other concern?
No, it's just the concern of it, there tends to get a fuzzy area where decisions have been made, issues have come up, but they're out of bounds for our review process.
I'm just not following that, what's the fiscal year trigger to that you're concerned with?
The review is July 1st to June 30th, isn't it?
Yeah.
Yeah, and we're doing the assessment near the end.
No, I
of
follow that
September.
part, I'm not following the consequence part.
I guess I felt last year there were, some issues that had come up in the meantime that were important, that people wanted to talk about, but they were not part of the June 30th year.
Oh, I see what you're saying. That's always an issue. That maybe, and particularly things that have happened very recently, but it's not in the evaluation period. And frankly, what your appointed official needs to know is if things are getting off track, if there's a problem, if there's a bump going on, we really should talk about it. And so I always bring up stuff that's relevant and that's getting council's attention, and it's a problem in the relationship no matter when it occurred. But to be very literal, you're looking at the whatever the year is that you define.
Yeah, you want to be fair.
Yeah, but that does always come up.
So maybe I'm now understanding you better. Is your concern the lag between the evaluation period and the finalization as opposed to whether it's a fiscal year period or not?
Yes.
Oh, you
It's-
said
it's
fiscal
the
year,
gap.
that was what was confusing
Yeah.
to me.
And that, just to enlighten you, that's why San Luis Obispo likes to do theirs in February. And then what they do is the city manager there and the city attorney build the council's goals and direction and vision into their work plans for their staff. And it tends to work really well for them because then it sort of builds into the budget in some sense. And then, it seems to be more of a flow for them with the way they do business.
Yeah, one other quick question. You will talk to the council about scheduling in June, but the actual one-on-one interviews with the council are in late August. But the council members will partake in the online evaluation, is that right?
Well, as part of that's not their whole contribution, but there's a piece of that.
Right.
Yes.
And that will be available in August, and the council will have what their colleagues have said as well as what the direct reports have said
Go ahead.
when the packet comes.
Right. So when the packet comes, our vision, and we can change this, is you would have the summary of the direct reports, the directors or levels, what we envision, but not the councils at that stage. And one reason, as we discuss this, is we're not really sure what the participation level of the council is going to be. And so so that's an uncertainty. Now, what the other colleagues have said in summary will certainly be factored in to the draft review. And so the result of the one-on-ones and kind of the flavor and the tone and the spirit of those, as well as what has been said, based on what was received, would get factored in to the council feedback.
What
at
are
that
the
point.
one-on-one interviews August 24th? What's the content of those?
So if you look at page 2 and 3 of the overview, it's an opportunity to take the member through these questions and to really talk more deeply than what you can get at in a survey about how things are going. And so this is my vision of what the questions would be. Again, they are guidelines. We can take the conversation.
But again, there won't be anything written that other council members can see.
Not at that stage, but after the interviews, a blend of what was said in the interviews, anonymously, of course, and what came through the online surveys would be summarized.
Yeah, I guess I remember it being helpful in the past where you could actually see other comments. they were anonymous, but they were what people had said, as opposed to a summary.
We prepare themes, and we find that to be helpful about what are the themes that have evolved, that all of you, the 9 of you, have shared with us in this process. And those themes are woven into the evaluation document. But I have never shared with council members the anonymous, any sort of input on what the others think until we get to the process where you're working in closed session as a whole. And but we haven't seen your process, and we're willing to be flexible and do what you need us to do.
Yeah, I guess I found that valuable to have an idea of other colleagues and in their own words.
May I ask you a question
Sure.
on that? So did you find it valuable when you all had a review in front of you, or did you find it valuable in the one-on-one interview? Because, again, we haven't seen your process, so we don't know if you received something that...
Oh, it was valuable in preparing for the council discussion.
Okay.
So you had a clear idea of,
What you'll have in advance is the input from the department head team about how they perceive what are the strengths and concerns they might have about their leadership. And you'll have last year's evaluation and the self-evaluation. And then we'll work with the council typically as a whole to talk about your consensus about
yeah,
the evaluation.
okay.
So as I'm thinking about that process and now realizing that you haven't seen ours and you wouldn't have access to confidential information until we had engaged with you, what, if I'm recalling it all correctly, what we had was the written questionnaires, and then we would have the summary that was made anonymous amongst the 9 of us for when we had the one-on-one interviews. And as I'm thinking back about how I utilized that information, I did find it thought-provoking to see what others were thinking. That didn't mean that I was going to necessarily fall in line with whatever a colleague thought, but I found it of value. So it's interesting that you don't do it that way and haven't done it that way, and there may be pros and cons to each. So given that kind of describing what we've done, what's your outlook to doing it the way that you do it, and why you favor it the way that you do?
Why do we collect, what do we find that you need in advance based on our...
Or why would you lean against sharing anonymous comments?
Well, what we would be doing if we did it your way is we would be taking what comes in through the SurveyMonkey instrument or whatever online survey we use and blending those into themes up front and including that as part of the packet we would send to you. And what Deb had shared, and frankly what I heard from the last consultant, is that there was spotty participation. Everybody didn't have the same fervor as this group about participation. So if you're blending the results of 3 very unhappy council members and sending that out as the definitive, or at least the themes that have emerged thus far, it might not be fair to the other 6 that didn't participate. So it could skew the outcome. It could be unfavorably negative or positive depending on who participated. And so that is what's guided my concern about this conversation so far today. But I don't think it'd be very challenging for us. It would be a piece we could build in to collect the themes that you all contribute and encourage you. We'll continue to encourage you to participate. But in my experience, school boards are judicious about this, and a few city councils, but many city councils will have 75% participation in the upfront stuff. They always come to the interviews and participate in the conversations, but some upfront stuff may not get done. So we could take the data we get, theme it, tell you how many people participate, how many members participated, and give you that summary.
And if you did it that way, you'd say how many participated, but say you had a couple of 2 or 3 themes in response to a given question. Would you describe to say, well, this was a shared theme by 3 council members, or would you just lay them out there?
What we typically do is say, a majority feel this way, or we had several responses that indicated this. We would want to make sure that we weren't skewing the outcome in any way. And that's my real concern as I sit here. I'd want to think through that a little bit more so that you're absolutely fair, because we don't want, you're one of 9 voices, and the loudest voice shouldn't get the most ink. And so sometimes people are very loud. I have a council member that likes to give me pages and pages and pages of responses, and one that will do it in a sentence. And who should get the most weight? And so that's the challenge of trying to blend and be thoughtful about what we deliver back to you, is that it's 1/9 as intended by, your process.
And I'm just in the back of my mind recalling what we would see from Sherry as best I can. And she wouldn't have disclosed to us if she was having trouble getting participation from certain members of the council. But when we'd get it, I was thinking back on, they'd be divided into bullets in response to a given topic, and you generally see whether there were 9 bullets or 6 or whatever. We're good at counting that way, and then trying to think about whether there were times where council members dominated with ink. And if there were, she probably truncated it.
But there were
Yeah.
quantitative scores on each element,
Oh, that too.
so you could see where people were on the spectrum.
Do you do that at all?
We've gone back and forth on that, and we find that it's really better to be qualitative than quantitative, because what is a 5 and what is a 4, and your 5 is your 4, and frankly, they're not that meaningful. And almost with every process that we've worked through council and developed and modified and worked through, we've gone away from quantitative scores, and we do have definitions for what is, what is the level of performance that's expected, meets, exceeds, competent, but it's not a 4.725 on each element, because frankly, how do you weight the various elements, and what is more important, to another versus another, and that's a whole different discussion. So what we find that's helpful for your appointed officials is the narrative message about what's working and what's not, what course corrections need to happen, and exactly how does that look.
So one of the things, you haven't been able to see what we had before, and we haven't seen a template of what you do and what it would look like filled in. Would there be an opportunity as we go forward with this for us, maybe as a committee, because we're the ones who wade a little deeper into the process, to see a sanitized version of an example, either the template or, better yet, something that has content that would be non-confidential?
I'm sure.
So we get this
Yeah.
sense of
And-
what would it look like, and okay, how would I do this? And we've done it a similar way for 6 years or so, and
We can do whatever you want, but let me share with you that we believe, we were notified that we're the provider quite a while ago, and we sort of built our schedule and our timeline, and so we're trying to squeeze this into your
And-
prescribed timeline.
and I can appreciate that.
So
I don't want to be
if we wiggle with
disruptive.
that,
Yeah.
I'm just saying, if we wiggle with looking again at the methodology and the steps, and building additional meetings with this committee back in, we're happy to do that. We just need to go back and look at our scope and look at our proposal and make sure that we've just accounted for that.
That's right. So we'd have to look at those trade-offs, and
Yeah.
one of the things that we would perhaps want to consider is that, so we're going to have a somewhat different model that we'll be using this year. How different? We don't know, and 2, do we want to try to understand it in greater detail prior to commencing with it, not prior to necessarily agreeing on the contract, but commencing with it? Or do we want to basically, for the most part, with whatever minor exceptions we might have here and now, and we're about ready to start the ARB interviews, go forward with what's proposed this year, and then we would have for subsequent periods an opportunity to give that feedback and see if we want to adjust it after this first cycle.
Pat, one
yeah.
idea might be we have a CAO committee meeting September 10th, the week almost of the closed session. Could we move that a week earlier, and then if there's any fine tuning or questions, that would give you a little time to respond?
Well, I'm having trouble understanding how we could do fine tuning the process that late in the process. I don't think that's
It
their
would just be
intention.
for the next year.
Yeah, this would be to go over,
Yeah, the debrief, yeah.
well, and the September 10th is preparation for those specific interviews. It's not to design the process.
I think the debrief of the process would then be in October,
Yeah.
as
Yeah.
Mary Ann explained.
Yeah, I mean, I was looking at the schedule and I just don't see a lot of room currently to really have much input and change what's currently been proposed. Once you know, the horse kind of gets out of the barn in terms of the process rolling out. So I don't, I mean, I'd be okay with giving it a shot for this year and you know, improving in later years if there are improvements to be
Well,
made.
it's a very rich, it has lots of information flowing in over a period of time, so I think it is worth moving ahead.
Okay. So, but I don't, are we recommending a specific contract? Because I don't see that in front of us.
The contract is attached to the staff report.
Sorry. Do you have that?
I think so.
Oh, so I didn't have it with me here.
Yeah.
Thank you. Okay. All right. So does, colleagues, do you have the staff report? It's not in this packet.
No.
No, it's in the
It was what we
separate
got,
council
yeah.
packet. We're gonna have places, but I guess we don't. Oh, there's one. Do you have two?
It's, I've got one.
Oh,
Yeah,
great.
sorry, packet page, oh, there you go.
Thank you.
Packet page 10.
Yep. So, we are then due to have a motion on proceeding with it.
So I'll go ahead and move that we recommend to the full council the adoption of this
Contract?
contract.
Second?
Okay. Any further discussion?
No? Aye.
All right, all in favor?
Aye.
We did have one clarity
Oh,
that we'd
yes,
like to
please.
get from you. We'd like your authority to go ahead with some scheduling in advance of your approval of the contract, just so
Oh,
that
yeah,
we can
I
meet
saw
the
that.
tight timeline
Right.
that we've laid out for you.
And I think that makes sense. I don't know if you need that.
Yeah, so that the technicality of that is that if, for some completely unforeseen reason, the council did not want to proceed on it, there's risks that you would be assuming, I guess. So if you're comfortable with it, we're perfectly comfortable with it, and I don't anticipate any problem.
Thank you. May I ask
Sure.
a question also? So the 22nd is contract approval based on your recommendation. It's my understanding it will be on consent. Clearly, council can pull anything off consent. I know that well. You don't envision, though, or do you, us making another presentation? I will be there for questions, so happy to do so, could be prepared, but what would your vision be, Mr. Chair?
I don't anticipate it. Does anybody else?
No,
No.
I think it would be
Great.
Great.
extremely
Surprise.
low
Look
probability.
forward to working with you.
Yeah.
Same here.
Thank you.
Thank you for spending the time with us, and we look forward to it.
And I apologize.
Thank you.
for making you wait.
We got through it.
That's right. Thanks, Joe.
All right. Oh, yeah, and I didn't have any speaker cards, so we don't have any public comment on this, and we will adjourn the CAO committee meeting.
Thank you.